Well, welcome back to Small Business Accelerate. These are our 4 steps to growth. We're right now in the process of building your sales strategy. I know, math, there it was last week. Lots of work, lots of worksheets, lots of math. And I don't really say that lightly because I know how challenging it is for people to commit to numbers. I know how challenging it is for people to get numbers. Well, this time we're going to talk a little bit more about stories and how value propositions change. So it'll be a nice contrast. So there you are, you're building your sales strategy, and we're going to learn how to pivot to reach new markets. This is where we think you're going to hear the stories of companies just like you making those changes to grow their businesses. Before, we want to talk about 4 areas of what you learned from your homework. What was in common between your current customers and those adjacent and new customer segments? What did they all want? What did some want that others didn't? What was different about them? That's key insight. This will let you know whether I have the same segment to sell to or is it a new and different segment. Next, where should you emphasize your current efforts? Is it really retaining those current customers? Do you have a lot of revenue opportunities to grow there? Is it expanding to those adjacent or pursuing new customer segments? Where do you win most? Maybe that's best thought about where do you win most this year? Where can you win most next year? Those may be very different questions. Again, what do you estimate as a cost to run each of your sales funnels to current, adjacent, or new customers? Do you have the money to do all 3, or should you only do 1? Do you have the people to do all 3, or should you focus just on 1? In the process of thinking about your customers today and what they could be tomorrow, what surprised you? What surprised you at the ease or the cost or the complexity or the opportunity about growing your business? Make sure you write those answers down. Hold on to them because these are key insights that you'll need for future sessions. Now, we're going to talk about pivoting to reach new markets. In many ways, people talk about value propositions as this relationship between the customer and, believe it or not, the company, which is you. This is who you are. How do you reach the customer? You do it through the value proposition right here. Now, each customer occupies a different headspace, geographic space, value space. So your value proposition has to match that space effectively. So we've done extensive research about how value propositions change by looking at various companies. And we found 4 key dimensions that these value propositions move. The first is what we call rhetorical or argumentative. We'll start again on that one. So, what is a pivot? A pivot is when your value proposition changes because your product, your service has to meet the needs of a different customer who thinks and is and acts differently than your existing customers. So how do you pivot? Well, we've done extensive research looking at how value propositions change for actual companies to have actual sales in new geographies or in new markets. And we found 4 dimensions which drives these changes. Let me share them with you. The first is what we call rhetorical and involves the argumentation you use or the reasons you use to buy your product or service. So this is often your verbiage, how you say things, or how you write things, the value arguments that you focus on, the key words that are used to communicate value. And you may say, do words really matter? I'm going to say, yeah. You'll hear more about that in a minute. Next is use case. This is how do you operationalize your product or service? How is it used? And how does it best meet the needs of a given market segment? You think that products and services can be used differently? The answer is yes, and we'll give you examples. The third example is design. This is where you have to change the characteristics or aspects of your product or innovation so that it actually articulates to market requirements precisely and gives the results that the customers desire. And finally, financial incentive. These are the people who benefit most from buying or using your product. This is understanding how money flows through a marketplace so that you engage with those who will benefit most. And that way they become key customers for you. Let's talk a little bit about why we know this. This is one study we did with a set of companies. And what you'll note over here is the dimension over here on the left side, going from the rhetorical changes to use model design, economic incentive, or this big word, none. This means that the CEOs of the company said, nah, my value proposition is just fine, and I'm not going to change it. You'll see the number of companies that focused their changes on each one of these particular dimensions. Notice most of them looked at design and or economic incentive. But we still had 7 that said, nah, I don't really want to change. Then we measured from that pool of companies that pivoted their value proposition along these dimensions, who got a strategic partnership, made a deal happen that allowed them to grow their market through sales. And what we note is those numbers are here. You can see those there. What's fascinating about this, out of 33 companies we studied, 22 got deals. That's 67%. But what's most fascinating is out of the 7 that said, nah, it's good enough, guess what? Goose egg, 0 sales, 0 partnerships. Not listening to the market means death nail to your company. So when we really look at the value of pivoting, that number of 67 greatly rises because we realize that it's actually those who change have a better chance of selling. This is the difference between your existing market, your adjacent market, and jumping into a new customer segment or market. So as you're thinking about this in your sales strategy, this is why these stories are going to be very, very critical for you to consider. So now we've seen how simple words, such as moving from silent to safety, can be a multi-million-dollar change when you iterate that value proposition. Now, is this only seen when one looks at international markets? No, actually not. It can happen within domestic markets too, as illustrated by a cleaning company we worked with in Austin, Texas. Now, cleaning companies all focus in Austin and most cities with the same set of zip codes, which are dominated by people who make $100,000 or more annually. You say, why? Well, it's generally because they have the resources to pay for the service. Now, how can this cleaning company compete where everyone is going to the same zip codes looking to create the same value, a clean house, for their customers? How do they differentiate their message? Well, we began to learn when we spoke with the customers of our company that the value that the owner of the house wanted was actually trust. Not trust that things will be stolen or taken away. That's not going to happen, really. But trust that the house will be cleaned as if they were cleaning it. They did not want to pay someone to clean their house in a ship-shot or poor manner. So they wanted to make it work better. It just so happened that our cleaning company used a color coding of actual towels. Very fascinating. They use blue towels for kitchen. They use red towels for the counters in the bathroom. Yellow towels they would use for the toilets. The orange towel will be used inside the shower. And then the green towels will be used in the living room area. That was a way they were able to teach their cleaners to do the work the same way, house by house by house. However, what was really fascinating is when the owner explained that to their customers, the customers weren't aware of that actual event and what the effect would be. when they heard that the yellow towels that were used to clean the toilets were not used to clean the countertops. And indeed, there was a mechanism of training that changed the chances of using a toilet towel to clean a counter in a kitchen. They were ecstatic. They realized that there was a methodology, a training structure, and an ingrained methodology to prevent the cleaning company from cleaning differently than they would clean. In other words, it ensured they would respect the cleanliness of their counters, the cleanliness of their refrigerators, the cleanliness of even their toilets, and not mix those pieces. So the owners realized that now this method was attractive, more attractive than other competitive companies, because they could trust that the cleaning would be done right, done as they would want. And indeed, this caused a problem for our cleaning business. Within 3 months after that value proposition around trust and the use of multicolored towels was rolled out into the marketplace, their business went up by over 50%. They did not have enough cleaners. They actually did not even have the system online to take in all the orders. So now they had to build their website more, train more teams, and get more towels. But in the end, they won because argumentation went from clean to trust. It went from we're doing the work to we're doing the work like you would do the work. Simply changing the argument won the day for this cleaning company. Now let's talk about use case. We're going to discuss the country of Portugal and a startup there coming to the US market. This involved an idea of a new algorithm, new technology, who the goal was to fit it into the clean energy industry into America, but actually was adopted into the financial industry. Briefly, it's a company called FeedZai. This technology was really interesting. It was developed in consultation with the European Space Agency. It allowed real-time data analytics and processing, so one would know productivity and activity going on across any data set. It provided immediate predictive intelligence for action, and it compared with historical data. This is really great stuff. It was real-time also on a PC or mobile device. They thought that the most useful piece was actually clean energy, to understand how wind farms could make better predictions of selling energy into the actual grid. But energy companies move very slowly, and startups need a lot of cash, and they can't wait a year or two for a deal. So it became clear that that application in the area of clean energy was going to be too slow. So what did? They began listening for other applications. The first idea was how to monitor whether an ATM was broken or not. Instead of doing batch processing overnight, this was about 6 years ago, so please be patient with the example, that all the banks were finding out overnight which ATMs were broken, which ones had been robbed, or which ones were out of cash. And they lost money for every hour an ATM was out of use. FeedZai could provide information immediately and get someone out to refill or fix or report to the police a break-in immediately. This seemed like a great idea, but they realized that could be even better. They realized that actually swiping a card at the ATM or swiping a card at the grocery store and now using a chip or Apple Pay, that needed to be confirmed that you are indeed you. And by doing that, they began to realize they could jump quickly into the middle of the burgeoning fintech market with identity services on the sales. So indeed, they linked together a series of investors, a series of corporate customers, and a series of partners to allow them to grow very quickly. And by 2016, within 2 years, they were one of the top 3 companies in Europe, startup-wise, and they had achieved unicorn status, being valued at over $1 billion. Again, the use case went from energy into fintech, and from fintech away from ATMs and into the idea of identity assurance for lack of fraud. This became a huge market that they continue to be in. Now let's talk a little bit about a U.S. model. In this case, we worked with a company that had two businesses. One was hanging pictures in people of wealth's home. The other was actually building art installations. And they loved building art installations inside of museums, inside of universities. I mean, all their creativity. They could make things beautiful and loved it. We ran the numbers. And we realized that when they did this, they actually were losing 25 to 30% of all the money they spent on the project. They were overspending because they loved it so much they gave too much effort. And indeed, we then looked at, can you make the deals bigger? And the answer is not really, because they were grant-funded deals generally. So this was not very cost-effective, but it was inspiring. They looked at this model of hanging up art. I know it sounds crazy, but hanging up and decorating your house. The answer is they made over 100% profit off of those deals. And in fact, they could do the deals not by themselves, they could do them through contractors, reducing costs even further. So they made the decision to choose the use case to grow was this. They would hang more art, make more money, and use the contractor model so that they could, as founders, do 1 or 2 installations a year to keep them inspired and excited. So again, the use case pivoted from 2 markets, one of them failing, one of them successful, to diving into the successful market right there, hanging art, and then using the other market to be a way to benefit their own experience. Now let's talk about design. Again, we're finding ourselves in the small country of Portugal, coming to the United States. This was a company that first thought they could help design a set of templates to help scientific authors get their papers actually into writing form for journal submission. They learned pretty quickly that those tools already existed or were not needed by the journals or the authors. But the idea of creating a template for important, complex documents was very important. And it was very important in this area of compliance, FDA compliance, and developing strategies for pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies to submit their materials for clinical trials, product development, and biological license applications. This was a big deal. So they began the process of actually designing and changing their model from a bunch of templates that looked like a bunch of papers to a set of templates that were dictated by the US FDA. And indeed, very quickly, they found themselves in Boston doing deals with some of the top pharmaceutical companies in all the world as a startup because they provided a very important aspect that even large companies had many people involved in doing, now an algorithm could solve. So they moved from science to a different form of science, regulatory science, and they made money. Talk about a US model. We worked with a company that made amazing bass speakers for DJs. You know, those are the speakers that go, and it seems like your bones are moving. Those raves and dance parties are big, as hip-hop is the largest music sector in all the United States. What they realized is DJs loved very reliable, clear-sounding bass. But as you can tell, that speaker is big, it's hulking. One person cannot really pick it up. You have to have 2 people pick up that speaker and move it around. They talked with their customers. What would they want? And for generally the type of gigs that are going on, they didn't need a ginormous speaker. They redesigned a speaker that's smaller, slightly sleeker design, and could be picked up by a single person, put into the back of a car or a truck or a van. It didn't require the van. So now it was smaller, it had the power it needs, and it was also less expensive, but still had the reliability and clarity was needed. It just wasn't as powerful. Their sales went up about 100% because they gave the people, the customers, exactly what they wanted in a different design. Fantastic pivot in a new designed product. Now let's talk about an economic incentive. I want to tell a longer story in this because it helps you see that understanding how markets work takes effort and time. This is a product developed first. It was thought to help people in nursing homes. Yes, over here, to take your medicine more frequently and more accurately so you would not have to go to the hospital. But the economic incentive ended up not being with the patient, but being with the hospital. Let me tell you that story. It's a company called Pharmacistant or Line Health. What the product meant, what they learned about and what drove them was that 50 to 60% of all medications treating chronic disease in America, like diabetes, were not taken as prescribed. This is 93 million Americans. Woo! This poor adherence, or not taking your medicine as prescribed, that's adherence, to type 2 diabetes alone was linked to 125,000 deaths and 40% of all nursing home admissions per year in the United States. That's a lot of cost, and that's a lot of lives. There's a 1 to 10 savings. If you just freaking take your meds, you save 10 times the medical expenses if you have to go to a long care facility or go to a hospital. And finally, this is costing the American system over $300 billion a year. Adherence, poor adherence to drugs. Lord only knows, wouldn't it be in the interest of the patient and the biotechnology or pharmaceutical companies to provide a device that would help with adherence? It makes sense. So the first value proposition was that patients will have healthier lives if they take their meds. Pharmaceutical companies will sell more medications if patients adhere and take their meds. And insurance companies will bear less long-term healthcare costs if patients take their meds. Therefore, patients need life-integrated reminders to help them with medication adherence. They should take their meds. You'd make sense. So they built it. It's a smart pill container, and I did not show their proprietary product, but it's a product that allows for either blister packs or individual drugs to be actually packaged per day. It's linked to an app on your phone and a monitoring service allowing your doctor to know whether you opened your package and took out the meds and presumably taken them. And if you didn't, it's going to warn you. If you don't, it warns the doctor, and the doctor warns you. Take your medicine. Shockingly, the patients wouldn't pay $15 even for this, let alone an ongoing expense for this. That's pretty low money. They pay $2 to $3 at CVS for those plastic pop-open things, but not anything more expensive. Insurance companies weren't sure, and they wouldn't pay. And the pharmaceutical companies gave them some startup money, but would not invest in the product with theirs. They weren't sure if this was really an application, even though all the math and all the logic was with them. So they refined their value proposition by coming back and investigating the problem more deeply. They realized that in nursing homes, or basically long-term care facilities, staff spent 1/2 of their time just dealing with medicine. If we can make it simple, it's going to make the staff better, may even need less staff. If you're a patient there, there's basically 100% probability someone's going to mess up your meds every month. Woohoo! Got to be excited about that one. That makes me worried. The value, though, was very clear. Less time on meds, greater accuracy with meds means less personnel, less legal liability. Seemed to make a lot of sense to me. It can be automated, less prone to error. It can monitor medication process in the facility. It can be validated for supporting any suits that may come up. And now you could have ordering and stock management happen automatically. Oh my gosh, that would be pretty amazing. Pardon me for that. Guess what? Nursing homes have no money. They only get paid by Medicare. There's no money to even spend $15 on a patient and an ongoing maybe $25 a month for a monitoring process. It makes sense that they should have some money, but there is no money available. So although the numbers are with them, the logic of the value proposition was there, no one bought the product. But then finally they found the winner. It came in the form of Obamacare. And this is, of course, the idea of the new strategy that was introduced during the Obama administration. I know it's changed in America since then. But what it basically argued that preventable readmissions were the goal. If Medicare wanted hospitals to make sure that the patients would not come back to the hospital, if they did within 30 days, the hospital had to pay those expenses. Because 1 in 5 patients were returning, and it was a huge expense. Not just $15 to $25 as we're talking about this device, but indeed it was at $2,500 to $25,000 a patient. Now, interestingly, if too many readmissions occurred, actually the government could now penalize the company up to $3 million to basically say, we're not going to reimburse you because you're not doing a good job taking care of people. So they had to reduce rehospitalizations or bear all their costs according to the Affordable Care Act. This is highly motivating for the idea that about 25% of all readmissions were due to not taking your meds. Hospitals are measured by that, the STAR system, and that penalty means real money out of their real pocket. So all of a sudden they're financially incented 2 ways, with penalty and payment. They needed to stop that process. So their current value proposition with Align Health device is this product offers a hospital to train someone how to take their meds so they will take their meds when they leave the hospital, to reduce readmissions, reduce penalties, and be an easy and virtually free way to build a relationship with that patient. And it functions with a smartphone and tablet so that now patients take their meds and hospitals pay less cost. Well, that worked. An equity investment was given and a clinical trial is ongoing with a leading U.S. hospital. They're gathering data demonstrating the economic and medical advantages of using their product currently. So you can see with Align Health's experience, logic is not enough with the value proposition. Even numbers are not enough. People have to be willing to buy. And sometimes you have to move to a customer that's incentivized to buy. Now, I know that's a great idea as it relates to technology, but what about simple products like music? Well, we know that music in the United States has generally been sold in the form of CDs, and I know that's an ancient technology, but are online using various platforms such as Apple Music, the iTunes Store, Spotify, or other tools. But very little money is earned by the actual person doing the music from those platforms. How do you build a market with that? Well, we worked with a local Austin musician who had the ability to tell a story about his life and present music from his guitar and time to an audience that was often very large, meaning full high schools of thousands of students. And in America, which no doubt you are in, you know that the people who have most money to just spend willy-nilly on stuff are actually kids. Their lunch money, their allowance money, or other monies they can spend on what they want. So what really was fascinating is that all of a sudden, instead of selling the music, he started giving the music away. And he partnered with companies who wanted to put ethical and high-quality products in front of the eyes of teens and early stage college students. And by doing that, he could put, for example, Fender or other types of products behind him, advertising those products. And they were getting, again, clear messages of value in front of large numbers of potential customers, those, in a sense, prospects. And they would go use the website or other words and experiences to convert them into suspects, while the musician was able to give a positive message, entertain, and give away his music. Now, how did he make money? Well, sponsorship of these events. And the sponsorship gave him the money while he gave the audience to the brands. So he pivoted to not the people who were not paying very much, which is the customer, the actual user of the music, to a sponsor who wanted to get in front of the eyes and get into the ears of the customers. So he could select quality, select ethical businesses that he could put in front. And now 3 years later, he's now played for about 500,000 people through these sponsored events, dramatically changing his financial future by pivoting to the right partnership for economic incentive. So, again, we discussed lots of interesting ways from how you make the argument. The words you use can change a business from failing to being acquired, to being something you can build in multiple countries. How use case is very important. It may not be always the same in every customer's case. How design of the product must meet the needs of your market. And finally, financial incentive can work for technology companies or for music or basically much simpler technologies. All the while pivoting that value proposition to meet the needs of that customer wins. Now, no math, all about thinking. You've done a lot of work listening to your current market. You've now built a sales funnel by listening to new customers with different and new problems. How do we pivot to reach those new markets? Remember that value proposition? Just restate it. You've already done this homework. Just paste it there. Remind yourself who your current customers are, what segment they're in, what characterizes them, their view of products and buying experiences. How do they experience the problem, and what are the ways they can benefit from your product? And why do they purchase your product? What are the key reasons they buy? And how you can drive a compelling value proposition to them so they buy your product. What does that look like? Write that down once more. That is your first value proposition. Now, let's think about how does that fit to your current customers. Well, it freaking better fit. That's what you derived it from. It better be the right one. But what about your adjacent customers? Did you hear different things from them? We talked a lot about this in the sales funnel. Now go back to your value proposition and change the words and the argument or this type of product and service bundle you're selling to meet the needs precisely of those adjacent customers that you built a model for the sales funnel. How do you give them exactly what they want so that their superior delight will spill over into more purchases? Finally, new customers. They experience different problems, but your product or service can still meet the needs. It can still win the day. What do you think they look like? You've spoken with them again. How are they characterized? What is the problem they experience? How do they buy products? And from that analysis, what is your most competitive claim? How do you move your product to meet their needs and beat out other competition? That is now your third value proposition. So yes, you're going to take one you already got, credit, but now you have to build probably a slightly modified value proposition and then a brand new one based on your feedback from new customers. Now think about it. What reshaped the value proposition that you built as you moved it from your current customers to the adjacent customers to new customers? What did it look like? Did you change the words? Did you change how they would use it? Did you think you need to change the design of your product? Or are you focusing on the financial incentive aspects? Who would win and buy your product? Is it some mixture of all these? Because honestly, every pivot is a mixture of words and action. So what does it look like? Write those pieces down. Just understand how you're moving and reshaping the market with the new value proposition. Think about the examples I told. Who are you most like? How can you improve your business by understanding how to meet new customers and adjacent customers with better value propositions? So there it is. We've worked to think about how to take one value proposition and move it to your adjacent and new customer markets. This is where we get the synergy with your sales strategy. You know the types of people and the numbers and the cost to reach them. But now, what do you reach them with? Of course, your product or service. But what form, what bundle, and with what message? Now you have the messages you developed through this session to now go to your sales funnel and start communicating value to everyone you meet. So I hope you enjoyed this time. Get to work on the homework, and we can't wait to meet with you again next week with Small Business Accelerate. So, I'm going to give you a few examples. So these are stories. Hopefully you like them. The first one comes out of actually Korea. You see Korea way over there, moving a product to the United States of America. That product actually was a brake spring. It's illustrated by a brake spring being there in that picture. One of the innovators we worked with had been in the market for several years and had failed. Spent all of her money on trying to get this brake spring into the auto market in Korea. But no one was buying. She was going bankrupt. And finally, she was a woman in a male-dominated society. She was in a real pickle. She argumentation, that these brake springs and the coating thereof made very silent and smooth braking. But unfortunately, that was not a strong value proposition to change from an existing brake spring in the Korean market to a new one that just happened to be quieter. But when we started researching the data, we realized that smooth and quiet related to another important issue. That was the wear of the brake pad actually on the braking system. An uneven wear led to brake failure. And brake failure is not anymore a hearing issue, but a safety issue. And in the automobile market, the highest value proposition you can give someone is how to have a safer product. And the reason is not necessarily so nobody has an accident by itself, but that no one sues them over the accident. Make sense? Having suits and government basically forced payments for poor management of a product costs them more than anything else. So once the argument went from, in this case, silence to safety, the product was bought. And indeed, Hyundai bought the manufacturing capability of this young entrepreneur, making her very wealthy. She then took those monies, built another manufacturing capability to service other Asian services, and then brought her products into Detroit, Michigan, hiring Americans to build her products for the big three. So safety is the way to win. Argument changed. Now, within America, we can give a great example of how argumentation changed. We worked with a cleaning company, and they're one of many cleaning companies that in Austin, Texas, were competing for the same people. This is a set of zip codes where people made over $100,000 a year and could afford a cleaning service. How can they have a leg up, a competitive advantage? Well, everyone said, what is the value that people want? Is it cleanliness? Is it free time? We realized after talking with many of her customers that it actually was trust. And it wasn't trust about them coming and stealing something from you while they're cleaning the house. Nobody does that. They know that the ongoing business is worth more than stealing something small. What they realized, it was trust to clean the house like the woman of the house, the decision maker, would clean it. And our company had a method to train bilingual cleaners how to do this well. They used multiple colored towels. So the blue towels were for the kitchen, red towels were for the bedrooms, yellow towels were for the toilets, orange towels were for the countertops in the bathrooms, and green towels were for the shower. Now you may say, who cares? But the moment the woman of the house, the decision maker, learned that there was not a probability, basically, that you take the yellow toilet towel and wipe off the kitchen countertop, they were like, I love it. You have a method to ensure you clean my house like I would clean my house, and I don't have to be afraid of what may be on my surfaces. You segregate the dirty things with towel color. Changing the argument that we now give you the trust to clean your house like you would clean changed this business completely. Within 3 months, it had gone up in sales by 50% because that was a powerful change in value proposition.